Hey everybody, welcome back to yet another Prefect Live, this time with, I think, a record number of guests. So again, I'm Chris Reuter. We have today from our community, front and center, Henning Holgersen. Henning, say hi. Hey.
Hey.
We've got Zach from the Prefect team.
Hey everyone.
Perfect. Tyler from the Prefect team. And Jamie returning second week in a row from the Prefect team.
Hey everyone.
Hey, thanks for coming back on. All right, cool. So thanks everyone again for joining us for another live stream on Twitch. Henning, I asked you to come on. I really appreciate you're actually, I think, a recurring viewer. Really appreciate your interaction in chat. Welcome to the stream. Anyone can come on Prefect Live. We'd love to have it. You can see the title here, what we're talking about, bootstrapping CD for Prefect flows and GitHub actions. Henning, what does that mean?
Basically, it means a way to deploy Prefect flows using GitHub, using automatic deployment. So no humans touching this. It's all just a repo. We're automating this as much as we can because we want it reproducible and we want it simple because we don't want to give developers like this kind of huge list of instructions for how to register a flow.
So basically, bundling up your Prefect deployment so that when people want to register a flow, they can just go and click a button and do it. Am I saying that right?
Exactly. And then, of course, as an added bonus, you can branch, you can connect this in a way that makes it possible to deploy to a dev environment, to a test, and to a prod environment, just like anything else you develop, really.
Awesome. And so before we get into it, Henning, if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What's your background?
As I like to say, I used to be an economist, fell into this kind of really deep rabbit hole with doing quantitative analysis. At some point, I was a data scientist. Now I think a data engineer is more fitting to my role. I live in Oslo now. I'm from Norway. I live in Oslo, and I'm currently a consultant and work with a company that is evaluating Prefect now. I had some experience with Prefect before coming in, and so I've been working a lot with my team and trying to set up a good baseline that can let us easily roll out Prefect to different projects, to different developers with different backgrounds, different level of experience with Python. And so that's kind of where today is coming from, really.
Got it. That's awesome. And so you say developers with a different level of Python background or probably just a programming background in general. Will they all identify as developers? Are they like data engineers? Is that who that persona is that you're setting this up for?
I think we have a tendency to forget that developer is a very wide range of people. Like I know really, really smart developers who have been programming in PL SQL for 20 years. Like they run circles around me in data warehouses in PL SQL. I pull up Python, like that's something completely new to them. And they need to learn that. They are not working with Docker. They cannot write the Docker file. And so these are smart people, but they're not used to this. And so if we're data engineers and used to this, like we cannot forget that, okay, what we think is very basic is to some people very new. And if they showed us the stuff they wrote in databases and wherever else, like we would be scratching our heads. So just remembering that, okay, this is a very, very big rabbit hole of even just data development for data is a huge area.
That's really interesting insight. A great take. So let's, I guess, for the balance of our time, what I'll do, I'm going to show your screen here. So that's up, and then we're up in the top. I guess, yeah, take us through what you've created, and then I think that we can rely on Tyler, Jamie, Zach to maybe help us to give a little bit of insight into how we might make it suitable for 2.0 in the future.
Yeah. So unsurprisingly, we've talked about Git, and to most people, Git means GitHub nowadays. And GitHub Actions have become really, really popular very quickly. And so that's what I'm basing this kind of example project on. This is a kind of a simplified version of what I'm developing where I work. But it basically has all the components. And so the general thinking is that we might have different teams. In this example, we have a warehouse team that might have 2 different flows. And here, one flow is a database quality check, which contains a Docker file, a requirements file, and the actual flow. So the Docker file, it's pretty simple. It just starts with a base image. It runs update and upgrade, because if you're in an enterprise environment, you need to be very thoughtful about security. Your images are going to need updating. There are going to be vulnerabilities discovered. And being able to actually manage that when security tells you that, okay, look at all these images you have in your container registry, all of these are vulnerable. Like, you got to fix this. Like, that's something you need to think about really in the beginning. And so, but this is all boilerplate. Like, developers, for most people, they don't need to really care about this. They will have to contend with, okay, what kind of Python libraries do they need? They will have to contend with, okay, what does the flow actually do, the business logic? And then there's a little bit of boilerplate here, because if you're doing it, if you're focusing on Docker, which is that's one of the choices I've made here, is that everything is in Docker. We want as few moving parts as possible. Docker is the one moving part we want. But storage is Docker. It's running out of Docker images. There's no S3 storage. It doesn't read anything from GitHub. It's all just packaged into one Docker.
And so let's talk about the benefits of Dockerizing or containerizing something briefly, because I know there are people in the Prefect community who are just getting started with this idea of data pipelines. So what are some of the benefits? Why is just a single image better? And then some of the hurdles I think we're seeing here. You've got to set up like a configuration file and stuff like that. So those talk more about, if you would, some of those benefits of using Docker and why you chose to Dockerize these.
Yeah. The thing is, like, this is a very simple Docker file. I mean, basically, Docker lets you abstract away. It's basically a tiny, tiny virtual machine, and it lets you configure pretty much everything on the machine. It lets you install software. It lets you add a lot of folders. It lets you install drivers, ODBC drivers that you're not able to pip install like that. And it's very, very self-contained. And that's one of the goals we have. We want our Prefect deployment to be able to handle pretty much whatever comes, because we don't know what kind of future needs might pop up. And if we have a system like this where a flow can be in a container, it can be its own container, we are able to install pretty much anything we want and have it run.
I wonder, Henning, how are you packaging your whatever you replaced with, or you're replacing with Prefect workflows now? How are you packaging and updating those types of artifacts? Or how are you making them, I guess?
I don't actually know a lot about what we're replacing currently. A lot of this is actually new is actually new functionality that is being introduced. There's a good English word for this. New capabilities. I think the term is. But yeah, we are also replacing some of the more kind of classic data warehouse tools.
What was it containerized before, or is this kind of your?
No. We're talking old school Oracle Data Integrator, Informatica, those kind of tools.
I've just always found it interesting when Prefect is able to help teams kind of come into the containerization world. I think it makes it accessible, and what you're doing here makes that so much more accessible to your team. And so I can appreciate that.
Yeah. So that's basically the structure here. We want to let everyone, we want to be able to have different teams, and we want those teams to be able to create different flows. And we're basically saying one flow equals one folder on this level. And then coming to the GitHub Actions, we actually have, I have 2 GitHub Actions here. I'm going to go through this one first.
This is very fitting, by the way, given your Twitter description, which I think is senior YAML indenter.
Yeah. Basically, what this lets us do is this workflow dispatch lets us trigger an action manually, because that's something that we need to do sometimes. For instance, if our security team tells us we got to update all our images because there's a security vulnerability. And this lets us, we have a parameter here that lets us select which flows we want to update. We're actually using regex here. And this is actually just looking, this is a very, very complex statement, but if you see here, it's actually searching for all the projects under, all the flows under the different projects. And it outputs this into a GitHub action construct that they call a matrix. And so this is basically becoming just a list of the different folders, the different flows. And this is being used here when you register, when all the flows are registered, where we use a so-called matrix strategy, where for each of those folders, this job is ran. So this is just fanning out in parallel. So if we have 3 flows, under this repo, this register flows here is going to be run 3 times in parallel. And so here it does pretty, standard stuff. It checks it out, it installs Python, it installs Prefect, it pip installs the requirement, it authenticates with Prefect Cloud, it authenticates with the Docker registry, and it registers the flow. And here we're using the flow folder to the project. It actually has a little bit of strange regex here to actually get the project name from the kind of top folder under projects to make that become the project name. So that's a big, you could do something else here, that's up to you. But so far we wanted to create this kind of equivalency where one project under the projects folder is one project in Prefect. Only thing it doesn't do is that if you create a new project here, you need to create a new project in Prefect Cloud. It doesn't do that automatically, not yet anyways. And then, of course, when you're developing, as you might do, you're in different branches, and you want to register this when you merge. And so we have a different flow for that. And it actually registers in this case, all the flows. When you merge, and I had to put in some extra little if statement here. So if you're closing and merging a pull request to this branch, to the dev branch, everything runs, rebuilds all the images and stuff. And so it does, in a way, it does a lot of unnecessary work if you're like getting one flow merged into dev. It rebuilds everything, but in another sense, like it doesn't take that much time unless you have this really humongous project. And especially because, as mentioned, when we run this, it runs in parallel. So it doesn't, I mean, takes more compute time, but it's going to register in basically the same time nonetheless.
I'm assuming you've set up some sort of, you're talking about parallelism. Your Prefect agent, you're using Dask?
No, this is just parallelism in registering the flows.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So this is nothing about what the flows actually do. This is just telling GitHub to, okay, parallelize this.
And just curious, I actually haven't seen GitHub Actions run like on demand like that. So I'd love to just see how you do that and how you can specify, which project or which flow you want to run against.
So this just comes out of the box when you have like a workflow dispatch type of event. Then you get this box here and you can choose the branch you want to run. And here's the flow pattern. We can just choose to run all now.
Wow, that's really cool.
And in a second or two, it'll pop up here. Here we go. And we can just follow along. And so while this one is churning along, you saw it was finished with creating the matrix, the list of holders now. This is what happens if you close a pull request without merging it. It actually, technically, it starts the GitHub action, but none of these run because both of them are skipped because of the if statement we had there.
I think interesting. I haven't used that feature in GitHub Actions, but I'm pretty new to GitHub Actions. But that's kind of traditionally been a problem with GitOps, I feel, is like the status of an open or closed pull request didn't have a lot to do with an actual Git commit. So that's kind of a powerful interface for GitHub Actions to have.
Yeah. I mean, like most of the time, you actually want to run something on the kind of proposed merge to check that the result of the proposed merge is going to run. But in our case, if we want to register the flow, we actually want to register it after the merge is complete. We don't want to register something that someone proposes to merge, and we definitely don't want to register it if someone actually closes the pull request without merging it, because that's pretty much the opposite of, okay, this is okay, I want to go into production with this. And so this is, of course, brings us on to one other topic, which, I mean, there's a thread on the Prefect GitHub with there's an issue with just a lot of different deployment patterns, and that has definitely been one of the inspirations. And there's the success recipes. There's a pretty new repo on the Prefect GitHub as well. Customer success patterns or something.
Yeah, customer success recipes. Yep.
Yeah, that has also a GitHub action example workflow. And then I know there are other people in the community that have posted very interesting GitHub actions as well. And some of those do different stuff. One thing I'm not doing right now that kind of hooks into what we're talking about, like when you want to register a flow, is that I'm not running any tests here. Like the only way to, like there are no actual kind of CI tests no automated tests. Like it registers the project, it fails or it doesn't fail in registering it, and that's pretty much it. So that's one of the kind of Lego building blocks that I'm definitely going to look into. That's going to be really interesting to see. The other thing that's going to be interesting to see, and now I'm pivoting here, is that, okay, this is all for Prefect 1. Like I've toyed around with Prefect 2. I'm building some flows. I'm using the Prefect 2 beta cloud thingy. I'm looking at some very, very, very boring radar charts, no Christmas trees or nothing. But I don't know how a good kind of CI/CD registering strategy would look with Prefect 2. Because basically we want to have different projects. We want developers to be able to not care about Docker or anything, but we still want the flexibility to have, install ODBC drivers or whatever kind of strange stuff that you might need to install. Maybe you need Java, who knows? Because, there's a lot of legacy stuff that we need to be prepared to integrate and to carry on. And so that's basically one thing I've been thinking about without being able to come up with any good answers, not yet. And I was wondering if any of you had any thoughts around this.
Yeah, so this is a really, really interesting topic. And 2.0 is still in beta, so we're still not only on the cloud side, but also on the Prefect client side, still building out a lot of this user story. But one major change that you may have noticed from 1.0 is in 1.0, a lot of our flow storage had a push model to it. So I think you're using it here. I didn't actually see the action run, but you specified a Docker file, and when the flow is registered, as part of that registration, we'll build the Docker file for you based on the spec. I believe you can include some local files, you can include extra pip packages, stuff like that, or maybe just specify your own Docker file. It's pretty flexible. So 1.0, we haven't quite made that leap to the push model yet. So as it stands right now, you can specify optionally an image for your Docker flow runner to use when it executes a flow. And if you don't specify one, it just defaults to the latest or the corresponding Prefect version image. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about your use case, because you've highlighted, look, I don't want everyone to be concerned with how to write a Docker file. I don't want repeated work of, some people just know how to write the flow code. Let's let them do that. What does your kind of ideal experience look like if you have a bunch of flows and need to create Docker files to run them accordingly?
I mean, ideally, we have as little of these kind of files as possible. Like right now, we have the flow, and we have tasks, and we have, all this. And then we have this kind of boilerplate stuff. Like here, you need to specify an image. You need to specify, okay, some of this you actually need to specify no matter what, but there is going to be some boilerplate. And boilerplate is okay, but it's better not to have boilerplate. We can tell our developers, just copy paste this, find a nice name for things. Okay, you're good. You're good. Copy paste the Docker file, copy paste requirements, and edit them based on what you need. But ideally, we would want a system where if you don't need to install any kind of extra libraries, you don't need to write a requirements file. If you don't need to install any stuff on the OS level, like ODBC drivers, which I keep coming back to, then you don't need a Docker file. But if you need them, you can have them. That's basically my ideal here. And just because I want everyone, all of the people developing the actual like business stuff, not the kind of like platform stuff that I'm engaged with right now, everyone developing all the other stuff, I want them to be able to not bother with stuff that they don't need to bother with. I don't know if that answered the question at all, but, and again, GitHub all the way. We want GitHub Actions. Like that's pretty much a requirement nowadays. Anything that's not as code, like you're not going to get far with that. You can't sell, like really, you can't sell a deployment process that's not some kind of, that doesn't have some kind of CI/CD automatic pipeline in it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what that would, so good news for you to start in 2.0, the default, if you just use, so if you don't need extra requirements, you don't have any special Docker file needs, you just need Prefect. That's the default experience. When you register a deployment, which is flow plus storage plus some scheduling, that's able to be picked up by an agent, basically. All of the information that you need to run the flow. When you register that, it doesn't need to build the image. By default, like I said, it will use the the correct Prefect versioned image. And if you do want a custom image, maybe you have some ODBC drivers, it sounds like you're having fun with those, then at least at the moment you would need to build an image ahead of time, and you would just, that would be one line in the Python file to say, use this image.
So basically inside the flow, just at the bottom, use this image or use this Docker file to build an image. Or
yes. Right now it's specifically the image. We, based on feedback, we'll certainly add stuff. There's a lot of different use cases with Docker, and we want to make sure we're flexible enough to support them.
And so in terms of storage, I've noticed that's one of the things that you really have to set up now with 2.0. And so I've just been very happy with either local storage and Docker or Docker storage. And in this sense, that means I haven't had to think about storage really. Docker storage, I just say this goes into the image where everything else goes anyways. So, I don't actually, there's just one less moving part, which is basically why I went for Docker storage. No need to kind of integrate some storage blob or get some weird permissions from GitHub, which, is all fun. And that's all fun in open repos and stuff, but if your repo is not public, then you need to authenticate and you have the GitHub tokens and whatever. But it's just easier, just go with Docker storage if you're on Docker. At least that's been my thinking so far. But with 2.0, I have to choose, okay, am I going to use GitHub storage? Am I going to use an S3 bucket, whatever? And then you have all the authentication stuff.
Yep. So in 2.0, a huge focus for us has been making that painful third-party authentication experience much easier. There's some stuff coming down the pipe in the next couple months that I think is going to make that a really first-class clean experience. So if you mentioned getting GitHub credentials, I've been there. What did I do wrong? Where is this typo? Did I format this string correctly? Right. No one wants to deal with that. We're going to make a big effort to standardize those things, to give you a way to securely store those credentials. And link those external systems, whether it's GitHub or S3, in a really clean way. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the kind of static nature of Docker storage. So in the CI/CD process, one thing that is nice, I'll admit, about the current Docker storage is builds the image and your flow goes in there, and that's the flow, right? There's no, the image isn't changing, flow isn't changing. You know exactly what's been put in there. What does that process look like from a high level on your end? Is it important to have that rubber stamped, this is the thing that has gone into the image and is being run? Is it okay to use another version control system, like maybe GitHub if it's easier?
Docker images are actually, if we go back to the screen here, I'm going to show you one thing. I think it's on another branch. I'm actually specifying the image tag because if you don't, the image tag is basically just going to be a timestamp, which means if you re-register the images, re-register the flows, it's going to be a new tag, and all the old vulnerable images, they're still going to be in the repo, and they're going to start howling whenever there's a security issue. And you don't want to have to go back and delete those manually. So I've had to actually tag the images specifically. So in that sense, there's no versioning on the images themselves. The Docker images is basically just the kind of the output of whatever state the GitHub repo was in when it was built. So the entire history is GitHub. And again, I don't know if I answered the question, but I rambled, so I guess.
That's good. I've also been talking a lot. Anyone else want to chime in with questions or interesting thoughts?
Well, I think the Docker story that you have here is interesting, and it's, I think, a default or like an experience that a lot of people reach to right away because it makes sense. I have this flow. All I want to do is register my flow and run it. That makes sense. You erase the whole Docker component of that. But in reality, this boilerplate that you're talking about wanting to get rid of, it's really 4 lines of configuration that you pass to the Docker build CLI.
Yeah, it's not all that much boilerplate. That's kind of why we decided we can live with this. Like, this is not going to be like there's the lines in here, and then of course there are the Docker file mainly here. And you know, if you develop in Python, you're going to know what a requirements file is anyway. So I'm not so worried about that. But yeah, there's a little boilerplate. It would be nice to get rid of it if we didn't need it, but we're fine with it.
Well, that boilerplate is really just managing the life cycle of your operating system configuration, basically. Like that underlying your dependencies in your operating system and whatever base image, all of those things. Whereas that's not, you could choose, especially in Cloud 2, to manage that lifecycle separately from your flow lifecycle. That way you can say you keep your flow, you keep the boilerplate out of the flow, and you just manage the flow with your regular Git, and that's where developers own. And then whoever is managing the flows can, the security of that can come in and manage that Docker file and that Docker build underneath. And then you'll just, all the flow needs to know is just what tag is that going to end up using. So you can kind of decouple the life cycle of those two things. I think just generally presented this Docker storage, people gravitated towards it, but you're really maintaining 2 life cycles there that are not very difficult to pull apart. And that may be beneficial to you in the long run, especially now you can start using a different type of storage that's maybe more accessible or works into your workflow better, as well as you can continue your security scanning, put stuff into your CI/CD pipeline like you were talking earlier. One of those tests you might want to add is like, Sneak or something that analyzes your vulnerabilities early in the CI/CD pipeline. You can do all those things and manage those separately, I guess.
Yeah, I like that's a really interesting point in that like you do actually get something from having that separation. And if we're actually able to separate to some degree the responsibility there, that someone is in charge, or at least has an extra task of monitoring the security situation with respect to the base images and the Docker images that are built, that can let a lot of developers who are happy to, build in dbt and, do whatever kind of business logic and write the occasional prefect flow, let them do that. Again, that's the whole aim here.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, we're getting up to about 4 o'clock Eastern. Henning, I know it's late your time too, so I really appreciate you joining us. Any, as my boss says, any alibis? Any last references?
You know what? I think I've hardly stopped talking for this time, so I'm pretty much I'm pretty much set.
Well, this has been awesome, and it is honestly really hard to do live stuff, and it's really hard to show off your work to a large audience. So I really appreciate you coming on, and everyone at Prefect appreciates you coming on PrefectLive and just showing us what you've got to reference our Slack channel. So I'm going to switch to large video, and we can all wave goodbye. Thank you guys, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Thanks.